Welcome, my name is Tate. Thank you for joining me. Today we're going to be going over echo views and the important structures within each one that you'll be able to see. So what I mean by views, here's some examples that we'll be going over. It depends on where on the patient's body you put the transducer and important structures you'll see within each one, and these are known as views. So we'll start with parasternal long axis view. It's a good starting point. This is an example of it. And how you get this view is you have the patient lay left lateral decubitus on their side, and you have them put their left arm behind their head and their right arm on their right hip, and you place the transducer on the left sternal border at around the fourth intercostal space, and you just angle the transducer towards their heart. And this is the PLAX, and here's the left atrium, and mitral valve will be here. It's not labeled. That's important. Left ventricle, the outflow tract for the left ventricle, and then you would have the aortic valve and the aorta, and you even see the right ventricle here. And then we have the right ventricle inflow tract, and you can get this by having the patient lay in the same position, but you'll angle the probe towards their right hip. And this is an example of that here. And you can see the right atrium, right ventricle, the tricuspid valve leaflets here, anterior and posterior, and the IVC. So then the next one we would usually go for is the parasternal short axis here, PSAX. And you'll have the patient lay in the same position, but you'll move the transducer will be in the same position, but we're gonna rotate it clockwise 90 degrees so that a notch is pointing towards their left shoulder, and you'll tend to get the mitral valve come in first, and you'll see the mitral valve. It's like a fish mouth, and you'll have the left ventricle behind there, and the IVS separating it from the right ventricle outflow tract. The next one you would get is the base or the top of the heart, and you'll see the aortic valve. And how you do this is have the patient in the same position in the transducer in relatively the same spot, but you'll angle the probe towards the patient's head. And this is a really important view to have. You can see a lot of structures here: tricuspid valve, pulmonary valve, that right ventricular outflow tract, right and left atrium, atrial septum, and even the main pulmonary artery. The next one we'd go for, it looks like a mushroom, and it's called the left ventricular papillary muscle level. And you'll have the patient in the same position, transducer in the same position, but you're gonna angle the probe inferiorly until these papillary muscles come into view. And then the last one we'll get in short is the apex, the bottom of the heart. And you'll have the patient and the transducer in the same location still, but you're going to angle the sound beam inferiorly until it comes into view. And mostly we're just in the left ventricle. This is an important view to have because it's the main pumping chamber. And so it's good to check for clots if there's bad blood flow turbulence. Okay, the next major category we're going to go into is apical. And we will have the patient lay in left lateral decubitus, same as before, but we're going to place the transducer at the cardiac apex around the 4 to 5 rib space, and we're going to point the notch towards their left shoulder starting out. And to help get this view, it's a good idea to have a hole or trapdoor in the patient's bed. And this is the fourth chamber. It's usually the first one you'll come to, and you get a lot of information from this view. You can even see the apex, but you'll see the right and left ventricle, right and left atrium, their valves, tricuspid and mitral valve, and sometimes you'll even see the moderator band here. And if you get a good view, you can see right ventricular free wall in this wall. And then the next one we usually go for is the 5 chamber. You're going to have the patient in the same position, transducer in the same place. But if you slightly rotate the transducer a little bit clockwise, you'll pull in this aortic valve and the left ventricle outflow tract and the aorta here. The next one we usually go for is the 2-chamber. You'll have the patient in the same position, same place for the transducer, but you're going to rotate 45 degrees counterclockwise until you see the left ventricle come in like this. If you get a good one, you can even see the anterior wall, but mostly you'll see the left ventricle, left atrium, mitral valve here, and papillary muscles here. The next one, I believe it's the last of the apical, is 3-chamber. And you'll have the same position, same transducer location. And you're going to keep counterclockwise rotating 45 degrees from the previous. And that'll pull in the aorta and AV valve, the aortic valve. And you'll still see apex, left atrium, left ventricle, all that in the mitral valve, but you'll get the aorta to come in, the atrial valve. That's important. Now we're going to go to subcostal window and usually start out with the 4-chamber. You'll have the patient in supine this time on their back. And you can have them turn their head to the left and sometimes raise their knees up if that helps. And you'll place the transducer below the xiphoid process, the lowest point of their sternum, and you'll angle the sound beam slightly anteriorly. And make sure to pay attention to the patient's respiration because this can affect your view because of the diaphragms down there. And this view can be important if you can't get good images from other views. And there's a lot of information here: left atrium, right atrium, the ventricles left and right. You can see the IVS and the IAS, the septum in between each one of these, and the apex and their valves. The last one we're going to go over is subcostal view, but the IVC, and this is it here. And that's the inferior vena cava coming up from the bottom of your body. You're going to have the patient in the same position and the same location of the transducer, that supine. And you're going to rotate the probe towards the patient's chin or face. And the IVC should come into view. And to double check that you have the IVC correctly, you have the patient sniff or inhale quickly, and you'll see it constrict down. And it goes into the right atrium. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. This is definitely me here. Yeah, thank you.